Well, that brings us to the tricky subject of punishment. You might recall the case we opened with. You're a clinician asked by the court to weigh in on whether to commute the sentence of an individual with antisocial personality disorder, someone who assaulted a bystander. Based on what you've heard today about genetics and theology, what would you recommend? Now that you've had a think about it, I want you to hear from our panelists. Professor Greg Caruso rejoined us to consider if, like him, you deny free will altogether, should any offender be punished?
The issue of punishment is a complicated one, and I think it definitely directly connects to this issue of free will. If you ask someone why should we punish this wrongdoer, one answer you might give is they deserve it. And that notion is what is often referred to as the retributive notion of punishment. That retributive notion of punishment requires a kind of free will. So free will skepticism is correct. Retributive punishment is not justified. But there is other reasons you might give for why you should punish someone, like punishment is necessary to deter crime, or it's necessary to keep society safe, or it plays a role in the moral formation of the wrongdoer. Those are forward-looking justifications for punishment. And those are perfectly consistent with the rejection of free will. But I would add, I also have an approach that I've developed that's what I call the public health quarantine model. So, for instance, if I were to come fly to see you in person and somewhere along the lines I contract Ebola, I think everyone would agree the state would be justified in quarantining me, i.e., restricting my liberty. And on my model, that justification is grounded in what I call the right of self defense or prevention of harm to others.
I imagine if you're like me, you've never thought in this nuanced way about punishment. We all likely think of it as retributive or restorative. I mean, we have verses in the Bible and the Quran about eye for an eye, which suggest a retributive model. And in our legal context today, courts try to make victims whole for their loss. A public health model is interesting. We won't delve into it much in a deeper way in this podcast, but I encourage you to look it up. And Dr. Gwen Adshead also rejoined us to consider how this kind of public health model can be implemented by sentencing for treatment, not only for punishment, giving examples from sentencing possibilities in Britain.
I think it's important when we think about sentencing to remember that sentencing is not just about the individual. The sentencing is the court's response on behalf of all of us. Because when people commit a crime, and particularly a crime of violence, it's committed against all of us. It's not just the victim. So when the court goes to sentence, they are sentencing, I think, not only as an act of condemnation, but they are also sentencing for protection. So sentencing is really complicated. It's not just about risk management. It's also about sort of condemnation as well, but also about whether there's something that could be done for this person. So, for example, people could be put on probation with a treatment requirement. And in fact, particularly since there's some reason to be concerned that putting people in prison may actually make them more antisocial rather than less. So we need to start getting thoughtful, that we need to be having more joined up thinking, I think, between mental health services and criminal justice, and particularly in probation. And that's the real world meeting of the role of the sentencer and what can be learned about what's going to help that person. How risky is he, and what could we do to make him less risky?
Next, we asked Professor Han Brunner, can the kind of genetic predisposition that he discovered in one family be used in the court of law to say, my genes made me do it?
The question has been raised whether one could use this in a courtroom. And in fact, it has been suggested by some lawyers in various court cases in the United States and in Italy. I know of a few examples. And I think generally, I would say these people have a tendency towards impulsive behavior, but then still the gene or the gene defect does not explain their behavior. If a person from the family that I reported on, if that person did something bad and I was asked to testify, I would tell the court that they had a condition that does affect them. But I wouldn't tell the court that they had a condition that took away their free will.
Returning to our Muslim thinkers, Professor Youssef points out that there is a methodology to follow in ascertaining the level of rational capacity, and hence the level of responsibility that an individual bears.
The first thing is that we must examine the evidence. You must go for neuroimaging, you must go to genetic testing, etc. So then you must have the behavioral assessment whether this person has the ability to do otherwise. So if it's proven that when that particular person not able to do otherwise, of course we can go for the defense and tell that the judge that he not able to do otherwise. So based on that, then we can go for the mitigation cases. But if a person just claim and using the excuse of genetics, yeah, of course we're not going to take that for consideration. So based on the evidences that provided, if it reached to the level of certainty, then I believe that the judge going to or the jury going to have a good decision on that.
And Professor Hashi expands on this to tease out the respective roles of theology and science.
In any given circumstance, in order for you to make a judgment or to make a conclusion on moral and legal responsibilities, there are two levels. They call it tasawwur and tasdiq. Tasawwur basically means conceptualization or description. So let us say when a crime takes place, we want to understand what are the causes of that crime. So therefore we check the person mentally, psychologically, whatever. Then we send to who? We send to medical doctors, to psychiatrists, and to other relevant professionals who are related to that case in order for them to describe the condition and attributes of that individual. Because we want to know the true picture of what caused these crimes. And I'm sure this is similar to the Western world as well. So when the judge receives the report from those expertise and professionals, then the judge now works on to build the judgment. And this is what they call tasdiq. So there are two levels, tasawwur first, and then you have tasdiq. So in the Islamic tradition, religion and science go hand in hand, I put it that way, because science is in charge for describing realities, understanding cases. So the job of medical doctors, the job of scientists, their job is to put the realities of things in front of us, to describe, to tell us about the mother nature and its elements, right? The theology and jurists, or jurisprudence if you want, they provide judgments, but the descriptions of what is going on and realities are provided by scientists.
And this role of bioscience to furnish evidence within an Islamic legal process provides an apt example of the complementarity and integration of religious and scientific perspectives.
So in Islam, this is where they talk about integrated approach, whereby scientists and expertise, they tell us what is going on, and the legal groups or judges, they give us the judgment. So both science and theology are needed in this case, in the Islamic tradition. And I'm sure this is the case in Christianity, this is the case in Judaism as well, because religion basically provides values, while science gives us, the concept and understanding and descriptions. And so we don't see any contradiction between the two for us.
All right, we're near the end here. So we've heard a range of views on the case study from our interviewees on crime and punishment, and the possibility of quarantine or treatment in addition to, or even instead of, punishment. And we have heard views on the importance of establishing rational capacity, while not allowing the excuse of genetics to remove moral accountability altogether. And we've heard about how science can generate the evidence needed to be taken into account, but that the ethical import of that evidence must be weighed. So, let's return to the epistemic framework from episode 1. When someone claims, my genes made me do it, or even, God made me do it, are those claims supported by evidence? Are they probabilistic guesses? Or are they falsehoods dressed in explanatory clothing? From a clinical scientific perspective, I would argue we're much closer to falseness than certainty in such claims. There's a weak link between gene variants and actual human behavior. And as clinician scientists, we must be honest about those limitations. As ethicists and religious adherents, we must be careful not to undermine a person's moral culpability without compelling justification. That said, I personally don't believe prison is particularly rehabilitative. So I might still argue for an alternative sentence, but on other grounds. Ultimately, I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions.